Too many times people at work avoid having conversations about their boundaries. They don't want to have a conversation that's going to feel uncomfortable. They delay it and they let that resentment build up. And then that impacts both the work and the relationships. So if you're procrastinating about having a conversation with someone about your boundaries at work, we're here to help with a step-by-step guide for preparing for and having this very important conversation.
I'm Tara Collison, and I work with leaders to understand and express their highest potential in their work.
And I'm Deborah Holstein. I've got over 15 years hands-on experience leading high-performing teams. Tara and I are sharing pragmatic, on-the-ground advice, tools, and frameworks, addressing some of the most pressing problems that you face as leaders every single day. Now, like with any communication, if you want to get ready to have a conversation about your boundaries, it's really important that you prepare. And a lot of that preparation is you thinking about the other person. And in this case, you want to be thinking a lot about what is your shared purpose together with them. You know, what value is you two working together bringing to that business? What are you both trying to accomplish? But also be thinking about what you admire, respect, or what you're grateful for about that person. Even though their behavior might be causing some resentment to build up in you, they're not doing it to annoy you, right? They're not all bad.
That's right. And to remember that whatever this circumstance is where a boundary is potentially being crossed, it's just that, circumstantial, right? It's about that particular situation. And the more you can remember that this conversation is about them, even though you are having a difficult interpersonal interaction, the better, right? And so being able to lean into that is a really, really important element. And one of the reasons why preparing is so, so important. And by the way, here's a quick check for you. If everything you're thinking is about how they need to change and you don't, you haven't done enough prepping on what you need to do differently. So that's something we'll talk about a little bit later in this.
I think that's exactly right. And so maybe you can talk about like how do you kick off this conversation?
Yeah. So the first thing that I like to think about is what's really working in this relationship, either as it is relating to the situation that you want to have the conversation with, the boundary conversation about, or just generally in the relationship. Like, I truly admire how you always put people first and then the work, or I always appreciate that you try to create belonging on the team. And then you can go into the next pieces of the conversation. But you really want to make sure that they understand you value them.
And I think it also helps because like it shows that it's not just about you and you're thinking about your needs. You are appreciating them in this conversation, and that helps them be open for the whole thing.
That's right. That's right. And then this gets you into the conversation about like, okay, what are we doing here together, right? We both share the same goal of making sure the team feels belonged, or we both are after the company making this big transition, right? And what you want to do once you fill out in your prep what that shared purpose is, when you're in the conversation, share it and then pause here and say, hey, do you see it the same way? Right? Is this your purpose as well? So this is the first place in the conversation where you really want to make sure that you're giving them space to talk to.
And then once you've sort of gotten that affirmation from them that, yep, they share that same purpose, you're then ready to move into that part where you're going to describe the pattern of behavior or the situation that is crossing a boundary. Now, it's important that you do it and describe it objectively, almost like you're narrating a silent film.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to ascribe any intention to the behaviors that are happening in there. You're simply talking about what's happening. And then importantly, you're going to talk about the impact that it's having on the shared purpose.
Yes.
And I feel like using language like, I've noticed that, blah, 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 that really helps to kind of keep the accusations, at bay, and people won't feel quite as on the defensive when they hear something like that.
That's right. That's right. And the impact part is so key, right? What is the impact of that? Because if they see the impact differently, there is often an aha that happens at that previous step when you're saying, and here's the impact it's having, or I've noticed that some people are withdrawing or whatever, and this is where you kind of really get and do make it personal. This is the place in the conversation where you say, here's what I need. And this does require a little bit of vulnerability. That does require that you lean in and are willing to say, actually, I have a boundary here, right? A great example is this is a hugging culture, but I don't feel comfortable with personal touch. And that is something that you could share at this point in the conversation, which is, I realize that culturally, that's a way of expressing care for each other and belonging with the organization and the team. But I've noticed that it makes me very uncomfortable, that it's not something that I am easily leaning into. And so I feel really awkward when everyone's greeting each other with a hug, right? And so you're disclosing what your need is. And then you really want to pause here and say, hey, I also know that other people have needs, and some people need their work to feel like it is a family or to feel like they belong. And that's hugging allows them to do that. So you pause here, you might acknowledge that, acknowledge the norm or the behavior, and open up to a question that says something like, I'd like to learn more about why, or more about your style, or more about your need. And now we're really starting to get into the dialogue, and we want to point that right back to that shared purpose, because we both care about belonging, or we both care about navigating this change. Does this make sense?
And I do think that by you going first and saying, here is my need, right, relative to the shared purpose, that should help them feel more comfortable about talking about what they need in that shared purpose too, because I'm sure they're feeling just as, insecure and uncomfortable about sharing those things too. So if you take that first step, it's much more likely that they're going to be feeling comfortable enough to share it with you. And when you get there, then you're in this beautiful place where you've invited this other person in to co-create a solution together, where both of your needs are getting met. Like, this is not about, you didn't come in and be like, hey, you're hurting my feelings, you've got to change, it's all on you. You're basically affirming that shared purpose. You're affirming their value to you in the relationship, and you're inviting them in to do that. And so there's a whole part of this conversation where you're talking about different possible solutions. And again, it's kind of like, it might be one solution, it might be three things that you have to bang together, right, to kind of create a solution that you're both going to be bought into.
That's right. Going back to that hugging, right, thing is like, maybe that is culturally part of the thing, but we can also introduce high fives or some other way to say we belong and we care and we're connecting with people, so that a hybrid might be the answer. It's not about what the answer is, it's that you're creating it together, because that's the path forward.
That's right. And by the fact that you're both done it together means that now you're both bought into that solution, and you're both bought into making it work. So it gives both of you this shared vocabulary to continue talking about it. You kind of want to say, like, when should we check in on this? Because, if compliance drops off at some point, right, or the solution that you came up with stops being effective for whatever reason, or maybe even one or the other needs or the situation changes and you have to change things, you now have a common ground to talk about, because you understand their needs and they understand yours, and you're in agreement on that common purpose.
Exactly. And if you have trouble coming to the solution, you just go back to that shared purpose and you start again. And this allows the conversation to maybe take place over a series of conversations should it need to. We have created a downloadable version of this talk script to help you think through how you would want to say things, what you need to say, how you discover the shared purpose. So feel free to click on that here, and then you'll be able to download that and use it for the next time that you feel like you need to have a boundary conversation.
Great. And let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear about it. Now, we'll continue to be discussing more leadership topics in the coming weeks, so stay tuned, and we'll see you then.
See you soon.